I think everybody's here that's coming, so we will make a start. Thanks, Dom. So yeah, welcome to the September meeting of Audit and Governance. I don't need to introduce myself, but I will. I am the chair, Joanna West. I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. Morning, Councillor. I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. Hassan is our new auditor from Ernst Young. So I would like everyone to introduce themselves just so that he knows who everybody is and so that everybody knows who he is. So Hassan, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Will do. Thank you, Chair. Hassan Rohim, an associate partner with EY. So I've taken over recently in terms from Helen Henshaw, who was previously the engagement lead for the council. So very pleased to meet you all today.
Thank you. I am going to go from Councillor Kerr.
Hi, I'm Lucy Kerr. What else do you want me to say? I'm one of this committee.
Yeah, sorry, I think it would just be useful if people could say whether they were members of the committee, independent members of the committee, or officers and their role, therefore. I don't know the easiest way to go about it, I guess. Yeah, to Richard and back again the other way.
Hi, I'm Richard Bonham. I'm the Head of Internal Audit.
Hi, I'm Simon Riley. I'm the Strategic Director of Corporate Resources and the Council's Section 151 Officer.
Good morning. I'm Paul Bettany, local councillor for the Bolton Ward and a member of this committee.
Fred Hussain, one of the councillors and a committee member.
Adrian Pegg, councillor from Ackworth and a member of the committee.
Phil Sunderland, co-opted independent member, well, co-opted member of the committee. Try and keep them under control, but it doesn't really work very much.
Harvey Jennings, councillor for Shelton Lock and Charleston, member of the committee.
Morning, Councillor Alan Grimmadell. I'm the councillor for Darley Ward and a member of the committee.
Hannah MacDonald, I'm Group Auditor.
Martin Shipley, Group Auditor.
Hi, I'm Sarah Walker. I'm the Head of Strategy and Performance.
Tracy Pearce, councillor for the Derwent Ward and a member of the committee.
Dominic Monaghan, Democratic Services Officer. Thank you.
Thank you all. Super. So, any apologies? We've had apologies from Councillor Willoughby. Any apologies from anybody else? No? Any declarations of interest? Nope. Super. Minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of July. Any items of accuracy that anybody wants to flag up? No. Any issues from the minutes that aren't going to be covered on the agenda? Lucy.
I wasn't at the previous meeting, but there were a couple of things there that I wondered whether we ought to be added to the resolutions to consider, being the Code of Governance, and there was a concern about carry forward audits and the responses of officers. And I wasn't at the meeting, so I've only got the minutes to go by, but is that something that we should be considering either as part of this one or the following item on outstanding items?
Richard, is that anything that you would be picking up?
Not necessarily. When we've spoken about the Code of Governance anyway, and we've got a Code of Governance, it just needs reviewing. And it's something that Simon and I have been chatting about. And it's something that's, it's based purely on the Sfvs framework, so it shouldn't get that out of date.
Is that all right, Lucy? Thank you. Can someone move the minutes then, please? Thank you, Harvey. Seconder? Yeah. Thanks, Fareed. Item 5, Audit and Governance Committee outstanding resolutions. And that is Richard to go through.
Thank you, Chair. If we refer straight to Appendix 1, the meeting date 27th of January 2021, the corruption, the counter fraud strategies, policies, etc. There's no comments and responsible officer in there at the moment because we're still formulating the best way forward with this. And it looks like we're going to get a small working group together made up of Tracy Thomas from the counter fraud team, someone from legal. I'm going to approach Sarah to see if there's someone from her assurance team that wishes to sit on it as well. An internal audit will be there to offer advice, etc. And Simon's going to sponsor the work going forward. There shouldn't be a great deal to be done on them because they were majorly overhauled in 2017, but we have kept an eye on them over the last couple of years. I did have a look at trying to amalgamate them into one strategy, but it didn't look very good at all. So we're going to split it back. But we have done some updates on them. It just needs now for it to be looked at to make sure that things are properly reflecting what the council is doing around counter fraud. The other one, the terms of reference, meeting date 16th of June. We've got a working group put together for that one. Hopefully, I'll contact all the members for a meeting in October. Again, we've updated the actual terms of reference at I think it was last November. So the only thing that really, one thing that does need changing, of course, is it still says audit and accounts. But again, we use the Sfvs model on that. It's just whether there's anything in there that we think is perhaps a bit out of date or perhaps something that the committee ought to consider. So again, that will I think, just need one meeting to have a look at it, and then we can bring the any revisions to the terms of reference back to the November meeting. And the rest, then there's the infamous handbook, which is now drafted. I gave you some sneak preview of what the contents would be at the training last week, and the chair has agreed that she's going to have a look through to see if it meets what she thinks the committee would require. So I'm sending you the link on SharePoint for that. I do realise there's an issue with SharePoint that the independent members can't access SharePoint because they're outside of the council. So I'm in contact with IT at the moment to get them a Derby City Council email address, pretty similar to what they've done at Derby Homes with their independent members, so they can actually access SharePoint. Otherwise, as Philip's found out, he doesn't exist when he comes to try and have a look at things. So that's one thing we need to address. But it's virtually there. I've got to check some links today, but the chair will have a look at it and see if she thinks anything else needs adding in. And then we can start using it. It's a living document, so I should be updating it all the time. And if any members have got see anything they think ought to be shared through that, we can do that as well. And I think that's pretty much it, Chair, except there's the knowledge and skills exercise, which again we'll pick up as part of the terms of reference working group.
Thank you, Richard. Sorry, I was so excited to come back to Philip to reassure him that he did exist. I forgot the last bit. Any questions on the outstanding resolutions? Philip?
Just on that point about SharePoint, obviously I can't access the thing, so I don't know what's on there. Got a fair idea what ought to be on there, but obviously until I can see it, I can't see it. I can't comment anyway at all. It does affect not just that, but it affects the issue of when we had the training the other day, accessing the slides, for instance. I couldn't access those. I was able to see them as we went along, but not able to refer to them at a later date and that. So it's not just for me, it's just for anybody else who's in this position in the future. So I think an issue that does need to be addressed at some stage so that they can access it in some way or other, whether it's via a Derby email address or whatever. I'll leave that to Richard and IT to sort out if they ever get round to it. Thank you, Richard.
I'm sure they will make it top of their priority, Philip, and hopefully by the time you have access to SharePoint, everything that you would wish to see on there will be on there. Any other items on that? Super. I'm apologising, and especially to Dom, to leap back in the agenda. I missed item 2, which was late items to be introduced by the chair. I have one. There was an email from the PSAA inviting us to become an opted-in authority. I'm going to ask Simon to just update on that at the end of this, so effectively item 10 of the agenda. So going back to item 6, Internal Audit Plan Q3, is back to Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Before you've got the Q3 plan, as you know, we are doing a rolling plan now, so we have a plan, although we have a plan for the year, we concentrate on each quarter, and Q3 we've looked at what we'd identified to you as in Q2 as areas for Q3 and Q4 to be looked at. Having assessed the risk, we've moved a few forward into Q3, and they're all in Appendix 1. You'll note that there's one audit there that's carried forward from Q2 being the key financial controls. That's something that we'll pick up this time. What we like to do with key financial controls is make sure we've got a big enough sample to look at. So the later in the year it is, the bigger sample we've got to choose from. You'll still see there's quite a few items in there that are cutting across the whole year, such as the grant certification work and things like that. We've got a number of contingencies in there, certainly around IT work, because we tend to find that there's issues coming out of other audits that we want the IT auditor to particularly pick up. Fraud and risk contingency as well. We can't really sort of predict when we might need to do any investigations or stuff, so we have a contingency for that. But it's pretty straightforward with the plan. Again, we're picking up on items in all the departments, areas that we think are of most risk. We've scheduled some for Q3, kept some back for Q4. It may change again because we do have things coming in from time to time from officers saying, oh, we're worried about the risk around this, so we'll have a look at it and see whether we need to deal with it. We also quite often have, I have phone calls from members also saying there's issues that they have seen either in their ward or whatever, and is this something that IA can give advice on, or B, is it something that internal audit could have a look at? I sit on the corporate risk management group, so I can pick up any new risks coming through there. I have monthly meetings with Sarah Walker where we discuss risk and assurance going forward, so Sarah has an input as well into how we're dealing with things. We've started identifying areas for 22-23, as I highlighted at the training last week, and I drew your attention to the type of documents we use for looking at those. But the plan as it is in Appendix 1, and I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Thanks, Richard. Questions for Richard on the plan? Lucy.
Thank you. I've got questions about 4 of the points and a suggestion of something else. The first one is regarding the economic recovery point on bottom of page 5. And it particularly talks about the city centre. Is there going to be any consideration of our local centres, particularly district centres, and their viability and health?
It's not something, Lucy, that we were thinking of at the moment, but when we come to scope the audit, we'll have a look at what all the risks are and see where the assurance needs to be on those. But if there's something that you feel as a committee member or you need to bring to my attention, if you want to contact me outside the meeting and say this is something that I've got concerns about, then I can have a look at that.
I don't have a specific concern, but we've all got district centres either in or near our wards, and if there are problems, then maybe everybody feedback. The second one is, what does Sfvs mean in terms of schools audits?
It's the school's financial value standard. It's the audits we do every year where we do a certain number. Some of the schools self-assess, and then a proportion, usually a third of the schools we visit, or we did visit, we still try to now even with COVID, and do a full assessment of it. And then Simon has to sign off a return to central government on that. So it's really looking at how they're managing their finances, etc. Again, one of the hold-up we've had this year is that the government have been going to amend the guidance on Sfvs, and we found out that came out yesterday, so it's something that we're currently looking at to see how it impacts on all our audits going forward.
Maybe as not a very common acronym, we could expand it. The third one is SEND, which is an acronym we know about. And I just wondered within that whether you'd be considering the school placements and the manner in which school placements have done. There's been a bit of a flagging up of some children's plan EHCPs mentioning schools that don't yet exist. And that's been an issue. And I just wonder if that is something that would be covered as part of that review.
again, Councillor Kerr, what we do is, when we come to scope the audit, we'll have a look at what the various risks are and talk to managers and officers, both in People's Department and also the accountants. And if Simon's got anything as well, he'll feed into us, and we'll look at the risks there and see what we can do around that and what are the key risks that we're facing from that service. So if that's one of them, then yes, it will get looked at.
There's also an item on vibrant city plans, and particularly in light of, for example, last night's item about the assembly rooms. I just wondered if that was going to include a consideration of venue sufficiency. How many venues should a city of our size have? Do we have them, and whether there's going to be such an angle in terms of our vibrant city plans?
It's down for 22-23, so it's not something we've given a lot of thought to yet. It's one of the things that's come out of the recovery plan. That's one of the themes within that. Again, we have to be careful as whether it's actually audit work and assurance work. So it's looking at what if that's a risk, then we'll look at it. If we don't deem it a risk and it doesn't need assurance placed on it, then probably won't feature in the audit. But again, it's one of those things that we'll have a look at and we'll decide when we put our scope together. So it's something that will be more detailed when we bring the 22-23 plan to committee in March of next year.
And finally, I did some training last week, which was looking at the insurance risks related to flooding. And I had not been aware that if you're living in a house built after about, I can't remember the year is 2008 or something, it won't be covered for flooding insurance if it's in a flood risk area. I have no idea how many of our newer houses in Derby are in that situation. But if they are, and if we continue to build these, then I think it's a risk to our population if they aren't able to get flood insurance. And I think it's just something that we ought to be aware of, and particularly in areas that we are currently building at the moment.
Thanks, Simon.
Just to maybe help Councillor Kerr, she'll be aware of our main flood risk as opposed to surface water risk is in respect of the Derwents, and the first stage of the OCOR project was to protect, and the focus was to protect the number of houses, as we know, Chester Green and everything else. In respect of new developments, obviously there are the planning considerations in that, and we recognise insurance issues in respect of that, but the city is doing what it can do, which is obviously through our OCOR project, our city, our river, protecting, I think it's between 500 and 800 homes are now protected upriver from Exeter Bridge as a result of that. So I think we're doing all that we can, but yes, the insurance market and new developments on floodplains has and always has been an issue that is planning as opposed to what we can do directly as a local authority.
Just come back on that. And I really support the OCOR work. The majority of the houses in Chester Green, which are now protected, are ones that would actually have been covered for flooding insurance because they are more than 15 years old. It's the new ones that have gone up more recently that will be the issue. And it may be that once we know where they are, we may be looking at how we need to protect those, not just from fluvial flooding, but from other sorts of flooding as well.
Thanks, Lucy. Simon, did you want to come back on the issue on SEND that Councillor Kerr had raised?
Yeah, it's just to remind members of this committee that was considered by the Children and Young People scrutiny panel, where Andy Smith, the Director of Children's Services and Strategic Director, explained that particular incident and also talked through the control framework and assurances that we have in creating ECHPs. If the audit in that area finds other areas like that, of course, it will be testing those risks and controls, and the auditor will bring it to our attention through the audit report. But that particular issue that was raised by Councillor Kerr, I think had quite a good airing at the Children and Young People scrutiny 3 to 4 weeks ago.
And just to follow up on that, we did have a suggestion of a referral to this committee to have a look at that matter, but with no context. So it's been referred back to the committee to ask for further context, hasn't it, to come back to us. But to send just a one-line email through to this committee to consider a fairly wide topic seemed a bit much without any context, so it might be something that comes back to us in November. Any other questions for Richard on internal audit? Philip?
Just a couple of things. On this, going back to the schools standards issue, presumably there aren't that a large number of the schools do not have. If they're academies, do they still have to comply with this value standard or not? And presumably somebody else checks it. Is that the way it works, Richard?
Yeah, we don't deal with the academies.
No, I realise you don't do either with them, but they still have to comply with it, and that they are checked by some outside organisation, presumably.
I'm not sure exactly who does it, but we don't. We're not involved in that. I'm not sure if Hannah would know.
I was just going to say, yes, the academies do still have to comply with the standard, but it's, like Richard was saying, it's a process that we don't get involved with. Yeah.
We don't have any responsibility to ensure that they do comply then?
No, that's for the Department for Education. They take the responsibility for ensuring that happens.
I just wondered that.
Yeah, it's just the local government schools that we have.
You're actually looking at, perhaps, I don't know, certainly a minority of the secondaries, but obviously a significantly lower number of the primaries, presumably, yeah. Okay. The other one was, one thing that's not in there, and I've not seen it in a number of plans recently, is internal audit review of members, and I'm thinking of members, not just allowances, because that's in cash terms, that's not quite small, but also things like registration, register of interest, and checking on that. In another place, in another committee, we get allegations about registering interests or failing to register interests. I wonder if it's something that needs to be checked, gone through by internal audit at some stage. There isn't a risk in terms of financial risk, but I mean the risk is quite clearly a reputational risk. If Councillor X fails to declare, or Councillor declares something wrong, it could cause significant issues relating to what that councillor may or may not have done, and so on. So I really think it's an issue that doesn't seem to be there at the moment. Now, whether it needs to be there in that particular quarter or in some subsequent quarter, I'd perhaps leave to Richard to think about. Is it something you've thought about, Richard and or Simon, and we ought to perhaps include in the internal audit plan in the future? I'm not suggesting there are any issues, but I think it is something that needs to be checked at some stage.
Thanks, Philip. Just before I let one of them answer, there was a bit of a review of such things, declarations of interest, the amount of, sorry, words are failing me this morning, the amount of the declaration limit has changed from, I think, £100 to £50. It came to full council last week, but that comes under, I think, the Standards Board. So having had a review of that very recently, and changes made to that, it might be something that's going to be considered, but I just wanted to update you of that one first. Richard, is it something that you'll consider?
It is, but I think we might take it a lot wider than just members as well. May well look at the member side thing, but also officers. I've had, funny enough, had 2 calls in the last week around conflicts of interest regarding officers. It is something that's now on my radar. So it is an area, and Philip is right, it's an area we've not looked at for some time. We tend to pick it up sometimes within other audits, but it's not something we've concentrated on, mainly because, as Philip said, it's been a low-risk area. But reputation-wise, if the press or bloggers do get hold of it, then it does get blown out of all proportion. So it's something perhaps we ought to consider for, if not Q4, certainly 22-23.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Just to say, as part of the work that we do on the external audit in terms of looking at related party transactions, we do some of the testing that we undertake does look at declarations, and also we undertake tests to companies' house in terms of what are registered there for members to do a cross-check the other way.
Would you also check what's not there as well as what's there? That strikes me as being quite an important part.
That's a bit more difficult
to check what's there. But
That is
a lot of issues are about what's not there, and where do you and allegations that there should be something there that isn't. That's actually, I think, a much more important point.
which is that's a bit more difficult to test in terms of where people haven't made a declaration, but in terms of looking at what is registered under Companies House, so that's an external source to what the council would have under their declaration. So you do the cross-check there in terms of any directorships, etc., that members may have registered that are not appearing on your own records.
I think Richard's got something else to add. Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the National Fraud Initiative also picks up, it compares creditors' information that we supply with Companies House as well, and can pick up if anyone's a director of a company that's doing business with the council as well.
Any other questions from anybody on internal audit plan? I shall ask one because I'm surprised nobody else has. Richard, at 7.1, the council has had a rebate payable. Could you explain why and what we will do with that money, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, over a number of years that CMAP's been in operation, since 2012, we've managed to make a surplus in all but 1 year due to my careful budgeting. And so, I have to blow my own trumpet every now and then. And so we have had a surplus well in excess of 300,000, and the operational board, which is made up of the Section 151 officers and the monitoring officer from each of the partner authorities, suggested that we perhaps reduce the amount of reserves that we've got down to a manageable level and pay off one-off rebate to each of the partners based on their share of the partnership. For example, Derby City Council is 57% of the partnership, so that gets of the total rebate we're giving, that gets 57%, which is the amount there. So it's a one-off one. It was approved by the partnership board back in February, and Councillor Willoughby was the representative for this committee on the board at that particular point in time. So yeah, it's a one-off due to prudent management of finances.
Well done. Thank you. Philip?
Could we have an assurance you're actually doing the job properly as well, or you're not?
Christmas parties on Richard, I think. If there's no other questions on that item, I will go to item 7, which is the annual governance statement for 2020 and 21, and that is Simon, please.
Okay. Thank you for this, and this is a requirement for us to disclose and evidence how we can ensure governance is effective in Derby City Council. So governance is about how we ensure we do the right thing the right way for the right people in a timely, inclusive, open, honest and accountable manner. And that sounds quite scary, but if you just look at the diagram on page 3, it talks about sort of 7 principles which should apply across local government, from behaving with integrity to transparency to managing performance through risk and strong public financial management. So the core of this report talks about the arrangements that the council has in place. And that's a mixture of strategy, it's the plans of what we plan to spend our money, constitution, how we do it, our arrangements for internal control, so risk, financial management and other aspects. And it also talks about how we ensure effective leadership, scrutiny at both the officer and the member level. So I don't have to remind members that last year was quite a strange year, that we were responding to a pandemic, and if anything, that is a real good test of our governance framework. Was it able to operate effectively to protect, support and communicate with the people of the city and with our partners and internally. And I think the answer is it stood up well. We did exercise for the first quarter of the year emergency planning powers that are in the Constitution, where we were able to be agile, for example, in terms of some of our decision making, as Rachel North, as a delegated person in our Constitution, was able to make those decisions. So the classic cases was being able to secure the Holiday Inn on Pride Park for rough sleepers within about 2 days, which wouldn't have been permissible in our constitutional, normal constitutional framework. Having said that, all the disciplines of risk logs, issues, decision notes were embedded in that. And so what I've done here is, in the big body of the table, I've reflected how that operated during last year, and you'll see it's broadly similar to some of the years, but it has COVID references. So I'm happy to take questions on that as you want. But having a series of governance principles and not being able to test its effectiveness is saying, well, I've got all the books, but I've never read them. So what we need to do is, where do we seek assurances? And for me, there's something about the real crux of this is about the directors giving us a positive assurance statement of how these principles operated in their area. So as part of this, every director gets given a self-assessment questionnaire in about April, May at the end of the year, and they have to talk about how the principles were embedded, how they sought positive assurance. And I know in your training it's about, don't just take for granted something is there, was it being operated efficiently, and also identifying whether they partially or fully met that. Again, it was comforting, I think, for last year that most people were saying that the framework of governance that operated worked well for them in their overall management, but also their response to the pandemic. You have a series of functions in the council, which you know from this committee are there, such as the Corporate Risk Management Group, which regularly reviews risks, and you receive, along with executive scrutiny, details of the risks. It talks about the Project Management Officer or Office and Corporate Risk Group. It's about strengthening and embedding arrangements. It talks about the various statutory officers who are here to help you obtain those assurances. So obviously myself, with the support of Internal Audit, we're here as myself as a statutory officer, and Richard to help you, and Matt, the monitoring officer, the data protection officer, the roles of the statutory officers of the Director of Adult Services, and also the Director of Children's Services. So they operated well, and during last year, those arrangements and those people were stable, which is an improvement on previous years, which longer members of the committee will realise that in the preceding years there was a number of changes in those roles. So hopefully you can get assurance about some of the continuity. So what were the key governance issues? And I think this is my assessment to you of where I think the key governance issues were. But part of the role of the Audit Committee is, from the work of the Audit Committee last year, from your lived experiences, is this an accurate reflection of what happened in 2020-21? So if you think about it, if in 22-23 you look back at 2020-21 and say, was the council self-aware and what arrangements it had in place to deal with an issue being raised, did this adequately reflect that? So obviously in the questions afterwards, you might want to ask myself, Richard, Sarah, even the chair of the committee about, well, how did we get those assurances in this year, and is this an accurate reflection? But I've pulled out a number of areas. Financial resilience. If you read the national papers, you read the local papers, the pressures on local governments in terms of financial sustainability against uncertain and one-year financial settlements, as well as an increasing demand for statutory services. That is an area which, during last year, we managed the COVID response well. We actually delivered an underspend on the budget, but the underlying causal effects of demands on local government vis-a-vis the funding remain for us as they do for others. So, and what I've suggested to the Chair is that in your November committee, we bring a report on our assessment against the Financial Management Code, so you can get more assurance about how, on the various dimensions there, about how you effectively manage your finances, your financial sustainability is in place. So that's an area I want to bring to your attention. The COVID-19 recovery, the models that we had of being able to forecast demand, forecast need, have all changed past COVID. So we've had a 7% increase in homeless presentations. You're seeing a 20% increase in adult social care referrals. And I think all members are quite well rehearsed on the demands for children's social care. Last year we paid a huge amount of a huge amount of business grants that we had to undertake fraud assessments on. And we had an embedded approach that Richard has described about how when we were paying out, I think in the end it was over £60 million, we tried to make sure the right businesses got paid, they were eligible, and if there was any clawback or whatever, we've done that professionally, but it was a risk because we were suddenly entering into a new size of money. So in addition to our 250 million budget, we spent 104 million acting as the government's agent in supporting the city, and we welcome that. Again, members know of our waste treatment facility at Sfvs, and last year was primarily about trying to arrive at an estimated fair value and also to establish the cost of remediation future operation of that. And that obviously continued through the course of last year, and by its very element still has a level of uncertainty about the next stages in respect of that. And then the other area which I bring to your attention is during last year we embedded a lot of our improvements around the SEND written statement of action. We actually have the SEND follow-up next week in respect of that, and we're feeling positive about that, but we're embedding a lot of the improved governance, consultation, engagement with sort of parent carers and other groups during that point in time. So that, if you can call it, is my assessment of the areas that I was keeping a pulse on last year about where I was seeking positive assurances or trying to make sure that the organisation fulfilled those 7 core principles of the annual governance statement. The report talks a bit about our response to the COVID pandemic, and that's really context and everything else. It then, at the bottom of page 22, talks about how we responded to the issues raised in last year's annual governance statement, which broadly covered the themes that we had, and I'm satisfied that for all the areas that we did implement the actions that we identified, but I'm happy to take any questions on that. And finally, at the end of the pack, or the report, it talks about the areas that I think as a council, and by implication you as the Audit and Governance Committee, need to be considering for the next financial year. And that's about sustainable delivery of our council visions and corporate objectives, which is really what this annual governance statement is about. Managing increased demand for council services, and that has to include market sufficiency, as well as the physical demand of people presenting themselves for service. Strengthening the council's contract management framework, and that's something under our Working Smarter initiative of making sure that we're getting the best value from our contracts, but also as we come to contract renewals, we look at the specifications, we have regular client meetings, we look at the terms of the contract and make sure that we're robust, and I think that is happening and it's important. Embedding the new partnership framework for planning and delivering services in the future, and that's about working with and for the city. Project management governance, which is an item further on the agenda, so I suggest maybe we pick it up there. For financial management and compliance with the Financial Management Code, which is a report you're going to receive in November, and further strengthening our controls around cyber security, which we recognise is always a threat. We are Technology-wise, we are well advanced in terms of our security. It doesn't give 100% protection, but we also need to invest in, obviously, the people side, because our best line of defence is the people, i.e. that they recognise cybersecurity, and every member, every officer is required to do a cybersecurity training by the end of September. So I'd encourage that to happen if it hasn't happened. And then reviewing corporate caseloads in statutory services, we're aware, for example, of backlogs in our food health inspections, and that's across everywhere, and increased social care caseload amongst other things. So where does this go? So there's your review of does this adequately, for those charged with governance, reflect where we are. It's presented alongside the statement of accounts, so it will be published and finally agreed when they are presented. External audit will have a look at this and say, does this meet our understanding from all the evidence sources and findings that we have, and they're currently undertaking that work. And eventually it goes to be signed by the leader of the council. It's required to be signed by the leader of the council and the head of pay service, our chief exec, and they will be signing it at the time that we present or sign off the final set of accounts, because the annual governance statement should reflect any knowledge up to and including that point in time. So I suppose my main message is it's encouraging that last year I think this annual governance statement and our arrangements served us well during what was the biggest challenge to how local authorities run last year. And these issues at the end, I think if you were to pick up many councils' annual governance statements, they'd have very similar assessments. But I think what we've done is we can actually show, A, we're aware, and secondly, we're trying to either seek better positive assurance or we've already got systems in place. So I'm happy to take any questions along with any of the other officers here, or indeed Hassan from Ernst & Young can say how it fits into their assurance findings as well. So thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. Hassan, would you like to comment on this now, or would you like us to do questions first?
Just to say, just as Simon said, in terms of we've recently received the AGS, and we're currently working through our procedures in terms of assessing whether it adheres to our understanding of the control environment and the governance arrangements of the council.
Thank you. Before I open to questions, I'm just going to say, I know that I sat here, I think, at the June meeting, having had training on the annual governance statement and talked about all the recommendations that Sfvs had suggested. I did sit with Simon after that and go through those and talk about the suggestions that had been made. But the agreement was that because Simon was obviously so far through last year's annual governance statement, that those suggestions would be looked at for what will be this year's annual governance statement that will come to us in sort of a year's time. So not to sound like they fell on deaf ears, because Simon was grateful for the suggestions that were made. I think it's really good to see that there is such a detailed response to the coronavirus pandemic, because that is, as you say, a huge issue that the council, everyone has gone through for the last year, but that we need to report on. Just to say, again, before I open for questions, that from page 23, where it talks about the key governance development priorities for 2021-22, are the things that this committee needs to look at throughout this year and make sure are being done, so that when we come back in a year's time, we can say, yes, this is what the recommendations were. Yes, this is what we've seen happen, and yes, we can sign off. So members of the committee that were members last year will be able to look back, and if members continue on the committee next year, you'll be able to look at this document and say, yes, I remember seeing this at some point. So let me hand over to questions, and I think, Philip, did you have your hand up?
I think the key one for me on these things, the issues, is the financial resilience issue, and the way in which the authority manages its finances and ensures that on a daily basis, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, whatever, that they do have sufficient resources to deal with the demands upon it. Financial resilience is an issue, is a word that's been cropped up in a number of things, and Sfvs talked about it quite a lot at one stage. Did they ever actually do a comparator exercise, Simon? There was some talk about one stage about doing comparators, so you could say, well, this is Derby City against this number of other city councils. Let's face it, there's other city councils fairly near us which has perhaps significant problems that we perhaps touch wood do not have, but you know, but there are others around the country. Is there some exercise that can be done on that basis?
Thank you, Philip. Sfvs 2 years ago introduced a financial management index or resilience index, which is published based on the revenue outturn forms of councils. So generally it's published around November of each financial year. And that looked at about seven factors that would impact on a council's financial resilience. Some of it is, if you want to call it, the burn rate of reserves, which obviously, if you're constantly living beyond your means, would indicate that maybe you're at higher risk in respect to financial sustainability and resilience. Other aspects is the percentage of debt relative to your net revenue expenditure. So you may have read nationally, Slough are servicing something like 30% of their budget services for debt, and they're going to have an asset sale to try and reduce that dependency. Others could be the amount that we spend on social care, because we know that is a major determinant of people's budgets, and some neighbouring councils spend 70% of their budget on social care. We are quite a high spender on children's social care because of the market sufficiency issues. So that is on Sfvs' website, and we use it as part of our assessment against the financial management code that got introduced about 18 months ago, and I was at that time representing the district councils on that group, so representing 200 councils in developing that financial code, which is what we're going to be bringing back. As we say in Cabinet and other meetings, our assessment of how we manage our finances is probably proportionate and appropriate. The level of reserves to respond to shocks, so this is usable reserves as opposed to our total reserves, which we still have earmarked reserves, PFI reserves and everything else. Our level of reserves in Derby has been, for probably a lot of the end of the last decade, a lot lower than some of our comparator councils. So it's not necessarily what we've drawn on it, but our starting point has been lower. And that impact then of being able to accept shocks in the system is obviously means the importance of financial management, living within your means, planning financial sustainability is more important. So from that assessment, you'll see the major area that is highlighted in that index is our reserve sufficiency. Not that we haven't got reserves, but compared to other people, we don't have that percentages of net revenue expenditure as high as some comparator councils. Thank you, Chair.
I think the point I was getting at is that I think members need to be reassured that this is being dealt with. Members of this committee, whether it's reported here or whether it's reported to wherever, that it is reported somewhere on a timely and regular basis. I did raise something similar in one of my counting queries, and I think I've been assured that these things do take place and do take place at various levels, but I think members across the board need to be assured that they feel that they have enough they have enough assurance that these things are actually taking place. It's all very well to say that the leadership group know about these things, but no disrespect, but I don't know whether you know or any individual members know, but as a group here, we need to be ensured that these things are in place. We don't need to do it. I think we need to ensure that somebody does it. And it just seemed to be a very key point of any governance priority in the future, the financial resilience of the thing. So it's an observation, really, and I don't know how other members feel about it. It's not an easy concept to get hold of unless you have a certain amount of accounting knowledge, I would suggest. And I'm not having a go at any individual members here because it's not an easy concept to get hold of sometimes. It's just an issue I feel is quite vital for this committee to be assured that that does actually take place.
Sorry, for just 1 second, Farid. Do you have any suggestions, Philip, on how that could happen? Because, I mean, obviously the committee here have full opportunity to ask for any assurances or to ask the questions exactly as you're doing, and are encouraged to ask questions and get those assurances. But do you have any suggestions as to how that might be able to take place?
It's a difficult one, really, because I'm not au fait with all the rest of the reporting. I'm au fait with a certain amount of what reporting goes on at a higher level. I don't think this committee is not here to check, to have reports on a regular weekly basis from Simon as to say, well, this is how we're doing this week, this month and things. I think that's too much for detail. We need to ensure that systems are in place to ensure that these things are covered. And I think that's what it is. I think we need a regular assurance that this reporting does actually take place, and that the situation is how it is at that point in time, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, whatever. I'm finding it difficult to articulate this because I don't know the full extent of what members know about already, or what members should know about already. And I think it is up to other members to decide what they think they need to know, if anything.
Thank you. Farid, was yours question on this, or can I get Simon to respond to Philip?
You can get Simon to respond to this one.
Thank you.
I think Philip's view, if we look at some of the failures in financial management, what we see in Northamptonshire and other aspects, it was clear that in those authorities that there wasn't necessarily regular reporting. If people don't report on Q1 and their first report is in October, that would show maybe a weakness in financial management arrangements. What we say in this annual governance statement is that we have a well-rehearsed, well-trodden process of bringing performance reports and financial reports quarterly to committee. We've worked with members to try and make those reports more understandable and to link in the activity drivers in it. There is often an assessment of all the aspects that we have, whether that be the spend, the capital programme, the drawdown on reserves, the outstanding debt. So what we try and do is to provide members, and the primary role is in executive scrutiny to scrutinise and cabinet to prepare. And yes, it may tell some hard messages about increases in demand, but we don't want to get into this hubris. Well, if we don't say it, we can sort it in the background, because this is about the responsibility for financial management, and this is where the SIP for Financial Management Code is very clear. It is a corporate responsibility for financial management. It is not just the Chief Executive and the Chief Finance Officer. And my role, my paid role as your Treasurer, is to try and make sure that I give you both the accurate but also independent assessment on our financial health, which I believe I do every quarter, and I get lots of questions from lots of people at executive scrutiny and other meetings, which I think shows, again, you're trying to seek that positive assurance of, for example, how do we manage demand in social care? And then in certain scrutiny panels, we'll explore it further. So maybe because you're the independent member here, Philip, you don't see the whole realm, but many members here will know of the sort of, what we do, and I suppose I would also say that I think there is robust challenge from many members on that, and hopefully I get 80% of the answers on the night, and then I'll come back with 20% outside of it. So thank you, Chair.
I think you usually come back with more than 20% afterwards. Does that reassure you a bit more, Philip?
It gives me a certain reassurance. I just feel that one of my roles here is to raise these issues as an issue, to ensure that members feel happy enough. If they feel happy with what they get already, and you know, we're not heading down a hole or anything at the moment, or anything like that, you know, fine, no problems. And as Simon's explained, you know, the details, I don't have a difficulty, but I just think it's something that needs to be aired on occasions to ensure that we are satisfied that what we've got. It's easy enough to know what you know. It's difficult is knowing what you don't know. That's the issue, and none of us can pick up on that thing. Or we might pick up on odd little bits here, there, and everywhere. But that's just the issue I wanted to raise. Anyway, thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, that's not something the National Fraud Initiative can pick up on, is it? But I mean, I think that highlights why it's so important for the committee to have independent members such as yourself who attend almost every meeting, unless it's your anniversary, and ask such questions, because as Simon says, you don't see what happens throughout the rest of the council at all the other meetings because you're not here to attend. I mean, not that we all attend all of the other meetings, but you maybe don't get the updates that others of us do from other group members because you're not part of a group here. But I think it is really important that you do come and you do ask those questions and put a slightly different side of things to other members, as you say, that don't have the accounting background and knowledge that you do. Does anybody else have any comments on what Philip has raised before I go to Councillor Hussain? No? Fareed?
My comments broadly are actually on the same theme. If we know about something, then obviously we will have an opportunity to act upon the information available or put to us and suggest ways of overcoming that problem or contribute and have a say. It's more difficult. I can't sit here and say that I know everything that is happening within the council, and I don't think any one of us is in a position to say, more or less, I've got full oversight, I know what's going on, I am satisfied or I'm not satisfied. But in a sense, we rely on officers to share any concerns with us, and as long as that is being done to our satisfaction, and we know, they have integrity, and when there is something worth sharing, they will draw our attention to it. And then, after taking necessary action, we can be satisfied that we think we've done enough to overcome or tackle a particular problem. So in the first instance, I think Simon and Paul and people in senior management need to give us an assurance that what this document is about to an extent, I think. But I think we should need that reassurance once every 6 months. A categorical reassurance, first of all, that the internal mechanisms which are in place appear to be working as expected, and that all the information which is gleaned from various reports reflects the assessment which is reached once every 6 months. So if there are any hiccups, they are shared with us, and then we play a part in suggesting a way forward or ways of tackling that particular difficulty. Because our job here, to be honest, I think it was said, we can't be responsible for looking through the spreadsheets and the minutiae of data which emerges every day. I haven't got that expertise. I haven't got even the time to read through everything that pours out of the council offices every day. But the job of the senior managers here is to be selective with that data and where appropriate to draw it to our attention. And then jointly we agree how we're going to move forward in tackling and that will actually reassure me at least once every 6 months that more or less everything is in order, or if there is something which is not in order, we know about it, and we are actually doing something about it.
And I think Councillor Hussain has actually hit the nub on the head. So you're a committee charged with governance, i.e. making sure that our governance arrangements are as robust as possible, seeking assurance on it. This document says how you should get comfort that we have the arrangements in place, internal control, transparency, robust leadership, risk management and everything else. And those frameworks by itself should then say if there's anything that is not operating, as you would say, proportionately with that, we would bring that as to you or to Cabinet. So, for example, Sarah, who's here, produces an annual performance report that will talk about project delivery, risk and other issues. So every quarter you will get an assessment over whether a lot of these key frameworks are working effectively. Are we hitting our performance targets? Are there risks? Are there projects being delayed? Etc., etc. But you will never know, and no one will ever know, that everything in the council is 100% certain. What this is trying to say is, have we got appropriate arrangements, and how do we get the assurances that will identify the issues, Councillor saying, and also what are we doing when those issues are identified? So if it's an adult safeguarding issue, we can't stop every adult safeguarding issue in the city, but you want to be comforted that when that is brought to our attention, we act appropriately in terms of responding, addressing, looking at was that a system issue, was that a communication issue, was that a partner issue, were they visible to us and everything else. So I don't think as a member of the committee you need to be worried about, well, do I know everything? But as those charged with governance, you have to say, are the arrangements that we have in place and the reporting proportionate that the senior management team or other members are brought to us issues, and it might be explored through scrutiny, it might be escalated to the external auditor to look at. If it's an objection, it might be in our performance report. All of these are part about good governance. So I think your explanation hit the nail on the head. That is what we're here to do, but not to get paranoid that we can stop every fault or every leakage or every error in the system. We spend £1 billion, we employ 3,200 people, we have 1,000 plus days of internal audit. We are going to have areas that we will identify for improvement. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Simon. Does that answer your query, Fred? I think there are two things that we can do going forward. A, we can always say, and as has been said at this committee before, is there anything else that we need to know that you're not telling us? And also to look at those recommendations for next year, the governance development priorities. Most of them have dates adjacent to them. So, for example, there is one on project management governance that has a timetable of December 2021. So at our meeting, I haven't got the date, but I assume there's one in January. We can come back and ask, what the update is on that. We can ask at the November meeting how that's going. I suppose the only one to look at are the ones that are ongoing, and they're ones that I assume that we can always ask questions on and say, how is that going? And do we need to look at putting in some sort of tighter date to them? But that was something that we discussed in the pre-meet. So there are always things that we can ask, and we can always ask questions, and we are always encouraged to ask questions. And next is Lucy Kerr with a question.
Thank you, Chair. When I read this document, I thought it's actually very much your voice, Simon. It's solid and dependable and cautious and reassuring. And I like that, because I think that's for me gives a lot more comfort than having something saying we're brilliant. And so it starts off from a good place. However, the points that Fareed has made about the things we can't see are also really, really important. And I think one of the problems that one of the things that I feel is an element of having an executive and scrutiny process within our governance is that if there is that thing, that hiccup that's coming along, it doesn't get shared with us as backbench members, it gets shared with Cabinet, and Cabinet will take a way forward, and we may not see that. It may not be something that needs to go to the Cabinet papers, so we are blind to that activity unless it comes out in some other manner. And I think that makes the level of reassurance that we are having a little bit more difficult than if it was a more open process. But we are where we are, we're not going to change that. But along that vein, there have been 2 or 3 occasions in the last year when Council has asked Cabinet to do something, and Cabinet has not. And that seems to me to be it shows, I think, a weakness in our governance system, that when a majority of 51 councillors are suggesting we should go in a particular direction, and a majority of 11 councillors choose to go in a different direction, our governance needs to be questioned. I haven't got an answer to that, but it may be something that you might feel like reflecting in a governance statement. The 3 other things I wanted to highlight as part of the main body of our governance principles. And second one is in capacity, and I think we are doing a lot in terms of capacity. But what it talks about here is almost all related to individuals. And yes, individuals need to be competent, they need to have the training, but it's how teams work that is absolutely vital. And there isn't any reflection here on how teams are being brought together and supported, particularly in a much more remote working process. And I think that there should be some reflection within here as to whether our teams are actually working well. We've heard from Audit that sometimes it's quite difficult to get the answers back because people are remote working. And I think it's something that is a particular issue in our current becoming post-COVID environment. I'm also aware, and some other people may be aware, that there is an issue being looked at in terms of the way the very small amounts of money that we spend as councillors in our wards, our neighbourhood funding, is being looked at. It's been a bit shaky. It was a bit shaky before COVID. It's become even more shaky during COVID because we aren't having ward committees properly to actually approve that funding process. And it's now being looked at, and that will be resolved. But I think that just the fact that it's being identified as an issue and a resolution is in process is something that, again, would give me reassurance to have included in a document like this to show that we are finding problems and we're resolving them. The other thing that surprised me is that one of the things that's certainly in my inbox has been a characteristic on and off for the last 18 months is bin collections. And we know that bin collections are partly due to COVID and staffing, but at the moment it's probably due to shortage of HGV drivers, which is a Brexit issue. So there is a reference in passing to Brexit here, but I think it could actually be reflected slightly more fully in how that is impacting on frontline service delivery, which matters to the people of Derby. So those are my reflections on that part of the document. The other 2 things I wanted to mention, and I've got several specific points which I'll mention either to you directly or to Richard or whoever. One is on page 23, and my screen's gone dead, so I can't give you any details, but it says something about predictive analytics managing demand. I don't think having predictive analytics will actually manage demand. I can't remember what the reference was now to. So I think that just needs to be looked at a bit more. And in the forward-looking things for the coming year, there is no mention of the climate emergency, which we have at last a strategy about to go out to consultation on, having passed this as council policy 2 years ago. And it's another example of where council, I think in that case, unanimously agreed a resolution, and our 10, now 11 cabinet members have not taken forward. So it isn't reflected there in those forward-looking things, and I think very sincerely it should be there.
Thanks, Lucy. Simon, would you like to respond?
Yes, it's Councillor Kerr raises a lot of important issues. Her first issue was about the two motions from council that were an executive function which went back to the executive, and under the strong leader model and executive function they made a decision based on the report that is produced there. But I think it's worth mentioning that in the context of the report, that the two motions were not accepted by executive, because it gives the right context in the year. As Councillor Kerr has said, that is how the strong leader and executive function works, and because they had resource requirements, both of those, the executive had to consider that in the round, and that was that meeting that happened. The issue of teams working well on neighbourhood funding, for example, on page 9, we said during COVID, various of the arrangements of how we worked, you may have had ward committees previously, or it may have been for 3 ward members saying how that funding is operating. We did do an internal audit about 18 months ago about the overall neighbourhood funding framework, and it was found, I think, looking at my other colleagues, to be sufficient or satisfactory, or one of that. So it worked pretty much as it should do, but we can pick up any concerns and if necessary do a follow-up audit just to address the issues raised by Councillor Kerr. In respect to business continuity, I think the annual governance statement did talk about how we exercised some of our business continuity during that period. And during that period, you're aware, for example, we had to withdraw at the beginning of the COVID period some bin collections, and we had to bring in external resource to do it. And then we had the vans following the refuse vehicles to try and keep staff safe. Most of the recent bin collection issues, which is about availability of drivers and whatever, is actually post the end of March, so probably why I haven't given it the emphasis that we had, but I can link in something there about business continuity. I would probably slightly disagree that predictive analytics wouldn't deal with the demand issues, because we have a commitment as a council for an intelligent council approach. So that might be about interventions in people's lives. Are we doing 20 interventions when we only need 2? What about future demand? What about future market sufficiency? And I know internal audit are doing now a lot more predictive analytics to assess risk. And Sarah's team and other teams are doing a lot about that. So yes, there's dealing with demand in the current, but there's very much about, we recognise, as I said earlier, demand for services like homelessness, referrals, etc. is going up. And I suppose finally, and I think it is a valid point, that maybe an area of focus where, in the governance, where we have declared the climate emergency and everything else, I think we should probably add it into an area of development in this year, because we're now moving from a climate emergency motion, a pot of money, into a strategy and engagement and delivery. And I think I'll take the steer of the chair, but I think potentially that could be a recommendation to add to the annual governance statement. So those are my initial responses to the issues being raised, but all valid issues.
Thanks, Simon, for your response. Lucy, was there anything there you wanted to come back on briefly?
I don't think so in detail. I think they were broadly good answers. Thank you.
In that case, I didn't see any other hands. Oh, Philip, quickly.
Just a small point. I did raise an issue with Simon beforehand about whether it should be called the Audit and Governance Committee. Quite clearly, I recognise the fact that it relates to the year in which it was called the Audit and Accounts Committee. However, I think perhaps just a mention in there somewhere that we have changed this, because we do see as an organisation the increasing importance of the governance aspect as well as the audit aspect. It perhaps might be worth a mention somewhere in the document, in the forward-looking part. I think that's just a suggestion, really.
Thank you. No, I think that's a useful thing, because it was sort of the end of last year, wasn't it, that we started the discussions about changing the name of the committee. So I think then the recommendations of the report, apart from 2 of them being called 2.2, can be added to include or I suppose actually they come under the making any necessary changes at the first 2.2 recommendation of adding in the details of the name change and the climate emergency and relevant details to that. But is everybody happy? Lucy?
I think that just for, given Simon's responses and just for precision, I think that the changes, the necessary changes referred to in 2.21 should also be as a result of the discussion at this committee or other inputs. Just open that up a little bit, not just from external audit.
I think you will also have the opportunity, the annual governance statement will be presented along when Ernst & Young come with their final accounts and matters of appointed sign-off. So you'll have that sort of a review at that point in time as well. So.
Thank you. And it will obviously be in the minutes to say that that's the discussion that's been had. Everybody happy with the recommendations then? I see nodding. Brilliant. Thank you. Next item 8, is the statement of accounts and external audit update. And Simon, that is you to at least start with.
Okay, thank you. And I know Hassan will probably come in as well, but we wanted just to report to the committee the substantial progress on the accounts and the fact that the accounts testing by Ernst & Young, though not complete, is identifying a well-presented set of accounts with high levels of accuracy and disclosure. But that is not to say that between now and the accounts being finalised and all the remaining testing that areas would not be identified. But I think I've got the agreement of Ernst & Young to say that we presented the accounts in June. The substantive testing and assessments have been undertaken, and Hassan shadowed Helen in that respect. And the fundamental issue at the moment is that we cannot bring to you, as we would have hoped, the accounts and the ISA 260 by 260 to this September committee. That will not be happening anywhere across the country because there are some areas that we just require further assessment by Ernst & Young. One is our perpetual friend, the getting the assurance from the auditors of a pension fund in respect of the transactions and the disclosures we have in the accounts for the pension fund. Ernst & Young and ourselves have been in active engagement with the auditors and Derbyshire County Council, and we hope that that assurance and subsequent testing can be done by November. But as we know from last year, until we get that bit of paper and that assurance, we cannot give an absolute requirement. I think the other area, and Hassan can build on this, is about the regulatory framework, where I think you're aware, not just in the public sector, but in the private sector, there's many more regulatory requirements for review, and some of those have come out as part of this audit period that Ernst & Young are now having to carry out further review and checks and disclosures as a result of that. That is perfectly reasonable and not unique to Derby. It's about the testing that would happen on all 320-ish councils in the country. But I suppose overall what we wanted to try and say is that we don't think there's hardly any amendments to the accounts. And the amendments as we know them are disclosed in the Appendix 1, and I'll just briefly go through those. None of those have an impact on the bottom line, or if you want to call it, our view that they presented a true and fair view. But we're going to add a contingent liability note for the Sinfin waste plant. We've agreed that with Derbyshire County Council, just because it was felt that, though it was referenced in the draft accounts, you had to go searching for the current context of that. So we've agreed that contingent liability note. The leases is a very small amendment in respect to rental from one company in the disclosure note. And you can see there's a very small change in the note in the account, but no real impact. There's further information on the exit costs, where we've identified sort of a small change in how we should disclose that, and we're creating a system going forward. BDO do the accounts, the audit of Derby Homes, which is, for our purposes, a group company and has to be consolidated in here. There's been some changes from their audit that obviously the draft accounts were based on their pre-audit, and now we have to reflect the interrelationship with Derby Homes. Again, no real impact on the sort of overall group situation. And then related parties here, and again, it's about, we've now got a better disclosure of that, and we'll be updating the notes. But none of these have an impact on the overall financial bottom line of the CIS, which is a consolidating income and an expenditure statement. And personally, if these are what appears in what we hope will be the ability to publish a final accounts in November, then I think this is a really good set, clean set of accounts. And again, credit, as I would say, to my team, who not only produced them in double quick time to be allowance and young on site in June, but the quality of that improvement that we have seen since the middle of last decade, where I know longer standing members of this committee will realise that some of these things that we now take for granted were really, we invested a lot in the last 5 years to try and improve it. So with your permission, I might invite Hassan in for any comments.
Thank you, Chair. So just to build on what Simon has said, so in terms of the key areas, so our work is nearing completion. The areas which are outstanding, as Simon said, relates to pensions. We have actually just recently received the IS 19 assurances from the pension fund auditor, so we're now working through that. But there is an additional piece of work which has come up on a national basis in terms of looking at the assurances which actuaries across the, in terms of all local government pension schemes, there's a gap in the assurances that auditors had. So we as a firm have engaged our internal actuaries to undertake a rerun of the model based on information which we're obtaining from local authorities and also from actuaries in terms of assessing whether or not the actuarial output is in line with our internal experts' predictions. The other area is in respect of group accounts. The work is significantly progressed in that area, but we do have a few follow-up procedures with the group auditor. And the next one is in relation to property valuations. Our EY valuers have raised a couple of queries which we're now following up on, and then we also need to complete the work on our value for money arrangements. So they're the key areas which where work is in progress, but as has been said, we are nearing completion. Also, just to bring to your attention, unfortunately during the course of the audit, we have had some staffing issues. Our lead senior on the audit, she had a family bereavement. Her parents in South Africa both passed away, so she was off for 9 weeks in terms of having to gone back to in terms of bereavement leave, and then the replacement that we had for her was taken to A&E for an emergency operation. So that's just kind of impacted on our ability from a resourcing perspective to get to where we actually ideally wanted to get to without these issues on pensions coming up at a late stage in the day. But happy to take any other questions that members may have.
Thank you both, and thank you for keeping the committee updated on things as you have done. Questions from the committee? Go on, Philip. You know you want to ask something.
I just wanted to give somebody else a chance, that was all. I'd just like to recognise, the committee recognise that I did send in a few a number of, so we say, detailed queries on the accounts, which were answered in a timely and complete manner. So just to recognise the fact that I have received those, and they're quite detailed, and I think they, apart from one, which, and I'll speak to Simon about that separately, they were fine. And I think that the way in which the accounts have been produced, and the timeliness of them in the accounts it's important that we recognise the fact that a lot of effort has gone into this, not just in a one-year thing, but obviously this is a build-up over a number of years, as issues of as past problems, so we say, have been superseded, and improvements have been made in not just in the individuals working there, but in the way in which the accounts are produced, and the way in which the documents are produced. And it is a recognition of the fact that Simon, not just Simon, but obviously all his staff, and I'm sure he would agree, it's not just he can't do it on his own. Or maybe you can, Simon. A lot of work has gone in there, and I think the committee, as a committee, we need to recognise the fact that there has a lot of committee, and thank them for all the effort they have put in, given the particular problems they have in the last year or two. Just one query, if you don't mind. Sorry, Simon. I've asked about budgetary overspends and things, and you mentioned 2 panels to prevent further escalation of financial deficit: a spending review and resource panel and a placement panel. Who is that? Members, officers, mixture of the two, or is it?
As part of that context, members will know that we reported a Q1 overspend, primarily driven by the impact of COVID lag, demand for services income, and also children's social care. As linked to the previous item about responsible financial management, we have considered that we need to take a more corporate view of the mitigations and opportunities we have to bring that overspend down, or to manage the demands coming into the system. As a result of that, there are 2 panels coming out of that Q1 report. One is a spending and resourcing panel, and one is a placement panel, where we will be scrutinising, and it's an officer panel which will meet fortnightly to try and not gatekeep everything, because I think that becomes too onerous, but making sure, for example, that we keep a laser eye on delivery of savings. We look at the need for agency and consultancy staff. We look at placement review dates, and have they been followed, and was there an opportunity to move people from a more expensive placement into a more cost-effective, sustainable placement. So this is about responsible financial management and keeping, if you want to call it, this corporate eye on the prize, which is, I talked earlier about financial sustainability being largely influenced by reserves, and if we have to draw on reserves, that reduces our ability to absorb shocks or volatility going forward. So those are the 2 panels, and it'll be more formally reported in the Q2 report that we're writing here, but to use that expression, we're not waiting for that to go through a formal committee approval in November. We'd put them in place, and actually the first meetings of those panels is this week. And again, the Audit and Governance Committee may, not in its November meeting, but after, just ask for an update on their effectiveness. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions on this one? Then we will note the report and record our thanks to all involved in producing the statement of accounts. Next item is Sarah, long-awaited Programme Management Office update.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm actually early with this update, because following on from Simon's report earlier on the annual governance statement, this is one of those areas that was identified for improvement for this year. So I'm here to give members of the committee an update on the work that we've been doing as part of the Programme Management Office to strengthen assurance overview of our project and programme activity. A good Programme Management Office, or PMO, I think ensures that projects and programmes are delivered to agreed standards and ensures that we work together to deliver better outcomes for the city. So I think for those members of the committee that were here a number of years ago, we actually established the PMO back in 2018 to develop a more consistent and robust approach to managing our project activity. Since the introduction of the PMO, it's gone through a number of different changes. So at the start of this year, an assurance team was created within my service area that cover a number of functions, both in relation to project management and project assurance and risk management and assurance as well. We do have a Programme Management Office Board, which is chaired by Simon, which I would like to say meets monthly, but we're actually meeting 3 times this month, which I think in terms of the responsiveness to the level of activity is commendable. So that board has been recently reviewed at the start of this year, and I would say collectively they are the functions that we refer to as the Programme Management Office. So the assurance team within my service and also the PMO board that obviously considers activities on a regular basis. So as part of the work that's been undertaken over the last 9 months to review, strengthen our arrangements in terms of project and programme management, we established a sounding board with professionals from across the different directorates. So if I can refer colleagues at this point to paragraph 4.11, we have reviewed project tools and templates to ensure consistency of activity, reduce duplication, and incorporate best practice. So particularly where we have new projects initiated, we're actually ensuring that they're meeting the standards that we aspire to as an organisation. And I think one of the key areas of development, which is also referenced within the annual governance statement, is the development of a project management platform. So this is a platform that's hosted on SharePoint, and it is a repository for all of our programme and project activity, both in terms of documentation, but also providing an overview of key logs in terms of risks, issues, decisions, and lessons logs, so that actually we have a more transparent overview of all of our activity, and we can use that to effectively support project personnel throughout the organisation in terms of the management of that delivery of that project through a project life cycle. We have reviewed and updated roles and responsibilities, and there's a lot of refreshed guidance available for colleagues across the organisation on My Derby to aid clarity and consistency. In terms of the project management platform, we've actually delivered training already. So we hosted sessions at the start of September, and we also hosted sessions this week, and they've been really well attended, and overall feedback has been very positive. And another area of I suppose, a key development is a review of our gateway guidance. So not all of our project activity will come through the PMO board. It has to meet specific criteria to ensure that the capacity within the board is focused in terms of the areas of greatest risk and the areas that will add the most value to us as an organisation and as a city. So Appendix 2 provides an overview of the criteria against which we use to evaluate whether or not a project or programme should come through the PMO board. And we work with project personnel to evaluate that at the earliest point in the project cycle. We have reviewed the stages of project delivery alongside the gateway to ensure that they're appropriately aligned, and we are seeking assurances at the most suitable points in project delivery. And I think I wasn't proposing to go through any further detail in terms of the changes that we've made. There's a full overview of the activities that we identified at the start of this year in terms of opportunities to improve and develop and enhance our response to programme management, and there's an update on progress with those presented within Appendix 1, and as I say, the updated gateway guidance is presented within Appendix 2. We will review that on a regular basis to ensure we are capturing the right projects. I think the only thing that I would say with a lot of these developments is obviously they will get maximum benefit with our new project activity. A large percentage of our current projects are in delivery phase. We obviously report on those through the performance reports if they're identified as priority projects from a council plan, recovery plan perspective. So I think that this will support us as an organisation to strengthen our overall response to programmes and projects as we move forward. But where there are opportunities, we are seeking to work with personnel on those that are in delivery phases. So they will all be migrating appropriately over to the project management platform if they are anticipated to have more than 6 months left in terms of delivery.
Thank you, Sarah, for a very comprehensive overview and a really well presented report. Just note that there's another reason then to ensure that independent members have access to SharePoint, because there is more information on there that they won't have access to. Any questions to Sarah? Lucy?
May not actually be a question to Sarah, because in terms of the report and the introduction, there is a wonderful structure, controls, everything is there to make sure that things are happening. There was talk about councillor training as well as officer training, which I was pleased to hear. But this doesn't actually talk very much about people. And I just wonder, this process is not going to work unless we have the relevant numbers of staff in the relevant places to do this. And I just wondered what the staffing situation was like, in that we've got, in the action plan, there is talk about capacity delays and similar. So how is staffing? I thought it might be.
It's fair to say that we still struggle with project management capacity. We've got a series of project managers in the Change Derby team and also in regeneration. And we are struggling to get the quality of applicants in respect to that. And we need strong project managers to embed this framework across the council, because we can work on what is a role of a senior responsible owner, so that tends to be a head of service or a director. And we've got the gateway reviews, and we don't accept everything through the gateway review if it's not sufficient. But many of you in your working life will realise that the difference between a successful a project that bumbles along or just happens and a successful project is having a strong project manager who is absolutely on top of the decisions to be made, the issues, logs, the risk logs, everything else. And we do need to get that resource, and we are struggling to get people to apply to the council for that. I think there's also, if we've got to be honest, if we look at past projects, some of the skill sets required for projects have not been assessed early enough about what is the capacity to deliver a successful project, and we're seeing much improved assessments of what will make a successful project going forward. And I suppose the last aspect is, I think we've turned a real corner, because we've recently done training over about two sessions. So this week we had 20 SROs on a training and 120 people involved in projects on a training. They came willingly to that training because now they see that this is a value-added framework that allows them to deliver successful projects and outcomes for the city. And previously, 2 years ago, when we tried to get people to do a health check, it was like trying to corral the unruly sheep, if I can use that expression. So there is a cultural shift that people are seeing the benefit of the PMO board, the frameworks, the platform, and actually what we're saying is we're here to support you in getting the right skills, so you can then take that pride that here's a project that we've initiated, we've resourced it properly, it's delivered on time, it's delivered on budget, or if not, the programme governance is really robust, that we know what we need to do to bring that back into that. But yeah, we do have capacity issues, and at the moment there is not an easy fix, both in terms of availability of people who want to apply for those jobs and all the money to fund some of those posts. So skilling up our own people, I think, will be a focus going forward, and is a focus going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can I just add to that as well? I think it's just important to reflect that we did increase the risk score as well in relation to that at Q1, which obviously was reported through. This is an area where we've considered a deep dive assessment through the Corporate Risk Management Group, which was highlighted in the year-end risk assurance report. But from the mentions of capacity within the report in relation to the assurance team, the roles within that team have been recruited to, and that team is fully staffed. But I think that the organisational capacity remains a challenge, but I don't think it's necessarily just a challenge for Derby. I think that there are challenges that other authorities are experiencing within this area as well. So just to add to Simon's point.
Through you, Chair, I think it actually makes it worse if everybody is short of project managers, because it's like social workers, isn't it? It's difficult to entice them to come to here rather than to be staying where they are or going somewhere else.
Any other questions? Philip.
Just a quick observation, really. I mean, what Simon has just said, it assures me that what's said in 4.9, we talk about this embedding the assurance framework in the organisation, and the more people that get involved, the more embedded it becomes, and the more it becomes the norm rather than something special that people have to do for a one-off thing. And it's part of the normal day-to-day activities, and that's how it should be. It's not just Sarah and people telling people what to do, it's everybody doing it on a day-to-day basis. And that's the embedding it within the organisation is key to the whole moving forward. And what Simon's just said assures me in that sense is that that is happening.
No, thank you. It is reassuring. Well noted. Any other questions to Sarah or Simon on this one? No? Then thank you, Sarah, and we look forward to seeing the updated report next July, but seeing you clearly before then. The last item then, for those of you that were paying attention, is extra item 10, which, Simon, if you could just give a brief overview, that would be great. Thank you.
Sorry, I put on my microphone before you'd finished, Chair. My apologies for the video. So I think most members are aware that in 2016 onwards, there was a proposal, a body set up called Public Sector PSSA, or Audit Appointments, thank you. Another acronym, Lucy, but sort of and they were set up to try and commission audit services across the country in a more coordinated way, look at the capacity in the market, and basically help councils in appointing auditors. And about 97-98% of councils joined up with this national framework through PSSA. And then there were, I think, 5 regional lots, and part of our lot, that sounds wrong, but part of the allocation of audits is that Ernst & Young were appointed as our auditor up to April 23. Other players in the market, Mazars and other people, have different audits in different parts of the country. That exercise, I think, has demonstrated a number of areas. Firstly, that there has been fragility in the external audit market in the same way we're talking about capacity of teams. The external audit market is generally viewed in the public sector as being quite broken, which is illustrated by the ability for us to deliver in the new regulatory framework at the price which is being offered, the audits to hit the deadlines which are set down nationally, like the signing off of accounts by the end of September, and we've had well-rehearsed explanations at this committee. I do think, and I've said this, that I think the price that was bid for or the work required means there is now a disconnect between what we're paying for audit and what we actually require for audit. And I would hope that any new bidding round, and it sounds funny, will actually price it properly and allow the capacity to be built back into the external audit sector. But the report that we'll be bringing in November is fundamentally saying that in order to be still in the pack of this group procuring of auditors, which gives continuity, it gives resilience, it means that we will be allocated an auditor, whereas if we went out ourselves, there's a risk that we could go out and no one bids for an audit, is that we'll be recommending that despite the problems that we've experienced in Derby and also nationally, that we should enter into this group arrangement to procure an auditor for the period of 2023 onwards. A report will come in November, and that report will recommend to council, because it has to be a council decision, that effectively we enter into this opting in, as it's called, into the future audit procurement. But I'm hopeful that it might start to turn the curve in respect of what I know Hassan would also comment has been a very turbulent period for the audit market in terms of external auditors being able to carry out auditors as they are required because of capacity issues, but also the price, meaning that in many ways what was bid for in 2018 is not sufficient for a quality audit to meet all the obligations. It's probably unfair to ask Hassan to add to that, but he might want to in November when I bring the full report.
Thanks, Simon. So, as I say, as Simon says, an overview of a report that will be coming to us in November for us to approve, hopefully, to then go to full council for the final decision to be made. Philip?
Just make an observation that the external audit market, as far as we're concerned, we seem to be doing okay, because obviously, as far as EY is concerned, as I understand it, they're concentrating on the upper tier authorities. Some of the authorities are slightly lower down the tier, and no disrespect to them, are not getting the attention that they require, and so there is a movement I am aware of a number of authorities to go out externally, to not go through the PSIS, but to try and do it individually as a group, particularly police authorities, for instance. So I am aware that there's an undercurrent of discontent with the arrangements. Well, I think a lot of people got discontent with the arrangements, but not only discontent with the arrangements, but discontent with some of the firms. And I'm afraid EY are not excluded from that discontent. So that's just an observation, really.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, observations? No? Then I will thank you for your attendance. I will see you on the 3rd of November for the next audit meeting, and probably the week before that for some training. But that